For over a century, progressive activists in the United States, peace, anti-war, social justice activists, leftists, anarchists, and so on, have chided themselves and others on our inability to mobilize successfully to stop wars from starting, to bring quicker wars to ends to wars that have already begun, and thereby steer the U.S. away from its decidedly militaristic and punitive approaches to both foreign and domestic policy. Many excuses and kinds of blame have been offered to account for such failed activism in this country. Some assert, I won't go through all the reasons people give, but I want to claim that the reasons for the weakness of progressive activism have mainly to do with strategy. And I also want to say that I use the term progressive activism with some hesitation, because I don't even like the notion of progress. It implies that we're always moving ahead, that there's something to move toward, or that history proceeds in some Hegelian sort of way that I think really begs an awful lot of questions. But by progress, I mean progressive activists, I mean those who have a concern for social well-being above property, for social well-being above profit, for social welfare above profit. I want to suggest that if we look at the various campaigns, and there are too many to list them all, but I've picked some major ones here, of Gandhi and of King, we can identify certain features of the most successful of their campaigns and certain features of the least successful of their campaigns to identify what makes for successful campaigns. And then I want to issue a caveat, too, about what we mean by successful and unsuccessful, following, to some extent, what Michael talks about in his book about what we mean by success. Is that the word you use, success, in your book? Or?
Work versus work.
Yeah. And I want to suggest that there are what we call short-term successes, like the overthrow of Milosevic, and then long-term failures, like democracy in Serbia. Right? And that we all look at the film, the video bringing down a dictator, and we say, wow, look what Otpor and some other groups did in Serbia. And while it was a good thing to bring down Milosevic, nonetheless, one of the people put in power was assassinated a couple of years later by Milosevic supporters. The country is still not what I think I would call a stable democracy. And so the long-term success of certain nonviolent movements I don't think is being looked at. We tend to look at short-term success. So let me suggest 4 features that I think are crucial to successful campaigns that often get ignored. The first is that in most efforts at peace movements in, well, I can say North America too, but obviously I'm more familiar with the United States itself, we tend to try and aim for national campaigns. And if you look at this list of campaigns by Gandhi, the 1917 Champaran campaign, the textile workers' strike at Ahmedabad, the 1919 National Hartal campaign, the Rowlatt Act, the 1920 to 21 National Swaraj campaign, Vaikom Temple Road Satyagraha, Bardoli campaign, the Salt March. The most successful of these are the local campaigns, and the least successful are the national. If you look at King's campaigns, Montgomery bus boycott, Albany, Georgia, Birmingham, St. Augustine, Florida campaign, Selma, Alabama campaign, Chicago campaign, Poor People's March to Washington. These are half and half, to be honest. Half of the local campaigns failed for other reasons we'll talk about. Half of them succeeded. The national campaign that he really aimed at didn't really succeed either. And so what I want to suggest is one thing that we need to do in creating a national successful national peace campaigns is do local campaigns successfully and well, and find local campaigns that capture the national imagination. That's what Gandhi did. That's what King did. The Montgomery bus boycott was not a national campaign. It was quite local. Secondly, I want to suggest that, let's see, that we tend to equate civil disobedience and law breaking with nonviolence, and that really the heart of nonviolent action should be non-cooperation. And so, for example, I was in a local march in New York City some 10 years ago. It was the march, I'm forgetting the person's name now, but there was an immigrant who was gunned down by 4 police officers, shot 43 times, Amadou Diallo. He wasn't guilty of anything. These police had been on a rampage all night long, harassing people. And so we had a demonstration when they were all four were acquitted. I happened to be in New York. I joined in the demonstration. And there were people who had decided to engage in civil disobedience, namely crossing police lines to get arrested. There was nothing particularly non-cooperative about that. It was civil disobedience for the sake of civil disobedience. And I think many of our campaigns in this country aim at civil disobedience for the sake of civil disobedience and getting media headlines rather than a concerted effort at non-cooperation with some policy or program that the government needs to continue. For example, a defense industry. Thirdly, I think goals need to be well defined, and Gandhi was better at this than King. Gandhi always accompanied his campaigns with what he called constructive programs, programs aimed at establishing an alternative to the status quo. King usually did not do that. King was not the anarchist that Gandhi was. King wanted to change government's mind and have government do things for the citizens of the United States. Gandhi wanted people to do things for themselves. And so when he conducted a campaign, his non-cooperation often consisted of creating an alternative social order or an alternative order of some kind or another so that the powers that be would become irrelevant. Right? We don't do that either. We still follow the King model of relying upon the powers to come around to our way of thinking instead of making the powers that be irrelevant. Fourthly, I think the campaign should capture the public imagination by offering the adversary a choice. And this is what King and Gandhi were both expert at that contemporary nonviolent movements are not so good at. The choice, I maintain, is this: do as we wish or make us suffer. Right? And that's the difference in dynamic, I maintain, between violence on the one hand, which says do as we wish or we will make you suffer, and nonviolence, which says do as we wish or make me suffer. Because you capture the public imagination to the extent that you are creative in the choice that you place before your opponents. It's not that you're trying to change the mind of the opponent. You're trying to change the mind of the mass of people who sit on the fence. And the way you change their mind is by getting their sympathy or their empathy, because you are going about doing what you want to do. You are going about either trying to register to vote or trying to grow crops that you want to grow, and someone is getting in your way of doing something that looks quite innocuous, and in getting in your way of doing something, that is really quite innocuous, you get hurt. And that's how you capture the public imagination, because you're not trying to hurt anyone else. You're trying to do what any normal person in that situation would try to do. But crossing a police barricade to get arrested in the middle of Fifth Avenue is not doing what any normal person would do. It's not the way to capture the public imagination. It's not the way to elicit sympathy from people who sit on the fence. And so I really think what the peace movement needs to look at is a way, a series of actions. They may be different from city to city, but I think the defense industry and economic conversion might be a way to go, where if you had something like in Flint, Michigan, in the 30s, where workers simply took over a factory and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make something else other than, F-45s, F-35s, whatever they are. We're going to do something other, F-35. We're going to do something other than this. We're going to make, artificial limbs, or we're going to make kidney machines. Stop us. Then you have a local action. It is replicable in other communities. It can capture the national imagination. It's non-cooperative. It's non-harmful. And it's controllable. Right? One of the problems with this march on Fifth Avenue, I keep going back to it because it really struck me, was there were 5,000 of us walking down Fifth Avenue. Anyone who wanted to join in could join in. And people did, and they had no training in nonviolence whatsoever. So there was one guy, there's a line of police along the curb, the entire length of Fifth Avenue, and there's one guy near me going down the police line going, F you, pig, quit your effing job, pig, quit your effing job. He was doing this literally in the face of every police officer all the way down Fifth Avenue. And I'm thinking, this is not someone that Martin Luther King Jr. trained to participate in the campaign, And You lose control of campaigns when they become national in scope. Gandhi realized this with the Swaraj campaign. He realized it with the Hartel campaign. King realized it with the Chicago campaign, also with the Memphis campaign, where he lost his life. He lost control of the crowd the day before he lost his life, or 2 days before, I think. And this is because you're not working in a community with which you're familiar. You're not working with people who have been trained. You're not taking your time. And this is what we do with these national peace campaigns. We say we want 1 million people in Washington, or we want 1 million people in New York City. You can't work with 1 million people. 500 people that capture the imagination of a local community, and from there the imagination of a country, can do a lot more than just turning up 1 million people for a one-day march.
Even sometimes one person.
Yes, I suppose. Now, in fairness, there are people who would disagree with me severely. Peter Ackerman, Jack Duvall, Mary, I'm forgetting her last name, who wrote the book about the Palestinian, the First Intifada, want to point to what they call successful nonviolent campaigns of recent years that have overturned dictators here and there. And the only point I want to make in response to that, well, 2 points. One is that those sorts of nonviolent campaigns that we've all been looking at lately and getting excited about are all campaigns that stress victory over opponents, right, rather than a success with justice for everyone. And they are also campaigns whose long-term success has yet to be measured. And I think we're jumping to conclusions that we'd like to believe in, that they've been successful, but I think we're jumping to those conclusions prematurely. First myth is that we regard violence as primarily physical. We need to get the word out there that that's not the primary manifestation of violence, that's a symptom that erupts after other kinds of violence are around. Secondly, that there are good people and bad people. We need to recognize we are all good and bad. We do good and bad, but there's no single person, with a few exceptions maybe in the history of the world at any given time, that are entirely evil or entirely bad. Third, that violence is necessary to prevent violence. That may be true in some cases, but we use that as a rationalization to use violence all the time by saying we have to intervene with a third party. We have to get to the other side of that. And the fourth myth, if I can remember it, is that punishment is that wrongdoers have to be punished. Actually, the fastest growing economic segment of the United States is prison manufacturing and prisons. And that's very profitable. And I'll leave it at that, except to say that if we take the flip side of that, and not say there are no exceptions, but we focus on the flip side being the rule, instead of each of those myths being the rule, we'd be a long way toward peace. I want to quickly add, too, that I don't like the use of the term peace myself. Peace is an end state that even the Pentagon favors, or says they do. And I think the issue is not about the end, but about the means. And when we talk about nonviolence instead of peace, then we are focusing on how we get to the end. And we need to get people thinking about whether we're going to get to the end nonviolently, not whether the end is good. Everybody agrees peace is good. The argument is over how we get there. And if we're willing to use violence to get to that end, then we're not working toward peace, I would say.
Full script.